military conflict. The architects of the memories may be an individual, such as a king, or a group, such as a city, social class, guild, etc. The medium in which the war remembrance is performed, or in which the war memories are constructed, may be physical monuments with an inscription like the Mesha Stela from the Iron Age Moab, an image without words like Neo-Assyrian palace reliefs, a song or epic like Homer's Iliad, or an extensive historical account like Thucydides' Wars. In my abstract, I refer to the example of the massive bronze relief sculpture on Boston's Beacon Hill, related to the African-American regiment that fought in the American Civil War. In the words of the Harvard president from 1867, this regiment gave to the nation and the world undying proof that Americans of African descent possess the pride, courage, and devotion of the patriot soldier. One could point to countless other such examples of war commemoration by which a group, often a minority like the African Americans, negotiates belonging and status within a political collectivity by commemorating their sacrifices and contributions in wartime. The examples are especially abundant within modern Jewish history, ranging from the monuments of the Jewish Confederate soldiers in the South after the American Civil War to the culture of commemoration that flourished throughout Europe and America after World War I. Jewish communities not only erected numerous physical monuments in their towns, but also made great efforts of historical documentation in textual form. Think here of the Gedenkbuch of the Jewish soldiers who had fallen in the battles from 1914 through 1918. It was republished in 1932 by the Reich Federation of Jewish Front Soldiers, who opposed Zionism and strove for assimilation in the German fatherland. In Jewish history, war commemoration served as a political means through which communities negotiated not only their citizenship in modern nation-states, but also their status within pre-modern empires. I am referring here, for example, to the memories constructed by Judeans of their collective contributions to the Greek occupation of Egypt. While the phenomenon of war commemoration has yet to become a subject of theoretical reflection for historians of the ancient Near East or of the Aegean world, research on modern societies has shown the extent to which war commemoration is deeply embedded in expressions of public life and the democratic political process of the nation-state. As with other forms of public ritual and performance, war commemoration is governed by the political context of its actors. Social, political, and ethnic groups with a vested interest in calling attention to their own sacrifices create counter-memories with which they confront corporate amnesia. By reminding others of their contribution to victory and their participation in collective sacrifice, members of society, political parties, women, ethnic minorities, gays and lesbians, etc., lay claim to public honors and political rights. This battle over memory makes and molds the nation's identity. Now, I would argue that war commemoration was not only a means for negotiating belonging and status vis-a-vis others, that is, the nation-state or the empire, but also the very means by which Judahite and Israelite identities emerged in the first place. I make this case in two forthcoming books. The first treats King David, specifically the accounts of the two periods in which he was forced to take flight and fend for his life, the first during the reign of Shaul and the second during the reign of Absalom. I argue that what sustained the long evolution of these complex narratives, late narratives, with their extraordinary profusion of episodes pertaining to all kinds of personalities, regions, towns, clans, priestly guilds, etc., was what we might call a Judahite identity politics. By this I mean the issues of belonging and status posed by populations, regions, cities in Judah, such as Keilah, on the western periphery or the southern clans, such as the Calevites and the Kenites and the Yerachmeelites. Likewise, the Avshalom narrative treats everything from the right of the Zadokite priest to officiate in Jerusalem to relations with the Gilad, represented by the figure of Barzillai the Giladite, to conflicts with the Benjaminites, represented by a host of different characters. The authors of these episodes addressed the issues posed by the respective city or town or clan or guild by using the iconic Judahite figure of David and constructing memories of how a particular group either offered him military assistance during his times of conflict or betrayed him during these pivotal wars in Judah's history. The second volume treats war commemoration in relation to Israel's ethnogenesis. The Bible presents the nation of Israel naturally evolving from a family into a large clan, and then eventually into a full-fledged nation. Yet when we examine the sources that constitute this grand narrative, we can see how various groups use war commemoration to construct Israel's national identity from originally separate groups and regions. Thus, one could affirm that a disputed territory belonged to the people of Israel, or deny their membership, by reporting how its inhabitants contributed to major war efforts and battles. Is the Transjordan part of Israel? The Song of Deborah poses the question, why did you stay Shafta among the sheepfolds to listen to the pipings of the flocks instead of the sound of the battle trumpet? In contrast, a prominent chapter from the book of Numbers allows the ancestors of these communities in the Gilad, or Transjordan, to respond to this censure. Moses asked them, will your brothers go to war while you tarry here? This line is cited often now in Israeli politics in relation to Haredi, who don't want to serve, the idea. In response, the Transjordanians insist that they will march as a vanguard before Israel into Canaan and fight until the conquest is complete, even though they would not take possession of any land in the Cisjordan along with the other tribes. In these and other cases, war commemoration serves as the means for the biblical authors to demarcate the contours of Israel and define the status of its members. The Bible's historical narratives emerge gradually through successive supplementation over centuries, and my study of war commemoration seeks to situate these redactional activities in relation to what is now considered to be a primary means by which national communities take shape. Now, is it possible to identify parallels to this type of war commemoration in ancient Near East, Egypt, Anatolia, Levant, Mesopotamia, and beyond? The short answer is no, at least not in the evidence available to us. The typical ancient Near Eastern war monument focuses on the king or the pharaoh. The armed forces that partake in the fighting are conceived as an extension of the ruler's sovereign arm. Or when it wants to deny that vassals and allies would offer their military service to the victorious king would have been keen to draw attention in various ways to their sacrifice and contributions, not only in the hope of receiving a larger share of the war spoils, but also with the aim of affirming their loyalty to the king and laying claim to privilege and honors. Yet there is a conspicuous difference to be noted. Whereas the biblical materials commemorate the contributions and sacrifices of communities, the evidence from the ancient Near East and Egypt is confined solely to rulers and their dynastic successors. Now, one might point to the Neo-Assyrian reliefs from the reigns of Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal that show soldiers standing next to piles of decapitated enemy heads and receiving rewards of symbolic jewelry, manacles, and bracelets, and other items. These are undeniably monuments that commemorate wartime contributions. However, the honored warriors cannot be identified. As anonymous soldiers, they do not represent a larger group. The scenes send a different message. The military offers opportunities for honor and social mobility to individuals who perform their duties with excellence. For the Neo-Assyrian as well as the Achaemenid armies, various sources reveal that royal officials kept records of soldierly prowess and exceptional contributions on military campaigns. These records were, however, not public inscriptions for purposes of political collective war commemoration, but rather the highly guarded state archives they were preserved in the highly guarded state archives, and it was confined to knowledge for the king that he could draw upon for later use. So what about public commemoration? We know that Ashur-etil-ilani, one of the final Assyrian kings, issued decrees conferring honors, property, and tax privileges, along with gifts of colorful robes and golden bracelets to a number of military commanders who demonstrated their loyalty to him and had assisted him in laying claim to the throne during a vicious war of succession. One may compare these decrees to the Behistun inscription of Darius, which at several points pays tribute to the names of a commander who rendered exceptional service on a military campaign, or to 6 of his followers, so-called, who assisted him in his rise to power. In the case of the latter, he calls on his successors to protect the families of these men. In my abstract, I cite the example of the funerary monument of Panu Muwa, who died in the service of the Assyrian king. He is said to have the Assyrian king is said to have mourned his death and erected a memorial to his name. We may compare this to the case of King Eshmun-Azar, king of Sidon, who in the conclusion to his funerary inscription from the early 5th century reports that the Lord of Kings gave us Dor and Jaffa, and the rich grain lands in the Sharon plain as a reward for the mighty deeds that I have done. These mighty deeds may refer to Xerxes' campaign in 480. While both of these monuments affirm allegiance through wartime service and sacrifice, they do so on the behalf of rulers and dynastic houses, rather than of populations and political communities. We may compare this to the case of the actions of Artaxerxes III in bestowing gifts, honors, and titles upon Mentor, a Rhodian soldier, for his contributions to his reconquest of Egypt. The Persian kings are said to have granted gold regularly to Persian women of Pasargadae for their role in Cyrus's victory over the Medes, and one could cite many other examples. Although these awards were made in public and often in formal ceremonies, we significantly know about them not from native documents or from official inscriptions, but from Greek authors in biblical literature. These societies did not develop a culture of war commemoration, political collective war commemoration, through which communities collectively negotiate belonging and status. For all we know, they produce no body of writings for public consumption and transmission. And where we do find public commemoration, it is focused on the great king or his vassals. There's no appeal to contributions and sacrifices on the behalf of the people or the land. I hope some of you will be able to cite a few exceptions to this rule, but I think that the rule stands as a whole. Now, while we search in vain for ancient Near Eastern analogies to collective war commemoration, the East Aegean offers a rich range of relevant material. One might think first and foremost of the so-called catalogue of ships transmitted in the Iliad. The lengthy register negotiates political belonging by naming the contingents and their leaders who contributed to a momentous collective war effort situated in the shadows of time. Most scholars agree that the catalogue has been supplemented variously with names of new contributors and the names of some participants may have been deleted as a way of criticizing these communities at later times. By stating exactly how many ships each land sent, the monument ranks the level of the contribution for each participant. The catalogue of ships is in many ways a striking analogy to the catalogue of tribes in the Song of Deborah. By far, the most interesting parallels related to collective war commemoration in the Aegean world originated after the Persian Wars. It was then that the Greek city-states erected various monuments that paid homage to participants, either a particular city or community or an alliance. These participants in pivotal battles such as Thermopylae or Salamis. In the abstract to this paper, I refer to the case of the Locrians, and there are countless others that I could cite, and they are all fascinating. Thus, an epitaph ascribed to the lyric poet Simonides is said to have read, "O stranger or traveler, once we dwelt in the well-watered city of Corinth, but now Salamis, the isle of Aegean, holds us. Here, by defeating the Phoenician ships and the Persians and the Medes, we saved holy Greece." This full two-couplet version is known only from later literary sources. Yet the fragments of the first couplet were found on a marble tablet found in 1895 on Salamis, which likely stood at the grave of the Corinthians who died in the sea battle of 480. The stela may have been erected sometime after the battle, yet the script is seen as archaicizing. The second couplet may represent an instance of inscriptions being expanded in the literary tradition. If so, the pan-Hellenic perspective, saved holy Greece, was not found in the original. Herodotus reports that Corinth, already at a very early point in the battle, panicked and retreated, returning only after the victory was certain. This version of the story was still circulated a century after the events. As most agree, Herodotus is here informed by an Athenian source, which was severely biased by growing tensions with Corinth. A more reliable tradition claims that the Athenians allowed Corinth to set up the stela for the war dead on the island, and even commemorated the Corinthians themselves. Other forms of commemoration of Corinthian contributions are known. Thus, a dedicatory epigram is said to have been inscribed in the temple of Aphrodite at Corinth. It supposedly was accompanied by a painting that portrayed the women praying that their men would be roused to demonstrate great valor. Both these women stood praying their inspired prayer to the Cyprian on behalf of the Greeks and their close fighting fellow citizens, for divine Aphrodite did not wish to hand over the citadel of the Greeks to the bow-carrying Medes. Many of these sources are cited by Plutarch in his attempt to prove the malignity of Herodotus. I don't know if that's the correct way to pronounce that word, malignity. Not only their authenticity is problematic, but some may have nothing to do with the Battle of Salamis. However, subsequent tradition, which may predate the work of Plutarch, collected these epigrams as evidence of Corinthian wartime sacrifice and contributions. Many other monuments, as well as works of historiography, for example, Herodotus and Thucydides, and drama, especially Aeschylus, illustrate how population groups and social classes used war commemoration in a manner strikingly similar to that of the biblical authors and modern nation-states, namely to negotiate belonging and to jockey for status in a larger political community. Aeschylus' Persians from 472 furnishes an important testimony. Although the navy was responsible for the momentous victory at Salamis, the play asserts that the real strength of Athens is its hoplite infantry. That the land battle was actually comparatively insignificant is suggested by the short shrift it receives later from Herodotus. It is possible, however, that Herodotus may have already been influenced by a more democratic naval perspective, which had a vested interest in identifying Salamis as the pivotal battle in the Persian Wars. Since Aeschylus was writing so early after Salamis, the poor citizen rowers, the rowers in the boats, may not have yet succeeded in making their voice heard in Athens. By commemorating an important land battle, Aeschylus may then not have been imposing the wealthier hoplites over against the less powerful rowers. After the Battle of Salamis came to be recognized as the decisive moment in the Persian Wars, other classes sought to claim a share of the responsibility. As explained in the Athenian constitution, attributed to Aristotle, the Areopagus council representing the highest classes deserved the credit for the victory. But ultimately, the Thetes, the serfs with only a small amount of property, seized on the memory of Salamis for their own interest. Although the navy was undeniably a critical component of Athens' hegemony, it was more immediately the growth of the Athenian empire that brought wealth and in turn political empowerment to the lower classes. To further boost their newfound social confidence and to justify their claims to a larger piece of the political pie, the Thetes reminded others of the part they played in Athens' emergence as a hegemonic power. The voice of growing democracy that supported itself by appeal to broader participation in battle can be heard most audibly in the plays of Aristophanes. In his Knights, an old man named Deimos, representing the people, who won the great victories at Salamis and Marathon. Whereas the Parabasis of this play allows the equestrians to claim for themselves the defense of the city, practice nobility, and for the national gods as well, quote unquote. His other plays designate the men at the top rowing bench, where the citizens were stationed, as saviors of the city. Aristophanes' Knights pokes fun at a situation in which every societal group sought to improve their political and social status by claiming an indispensable role in defending the community. Illustrating the absurd dimensions of politicized war commemoration, the play presents immediately thereafter a chorus of the knights lauding the wartime contributions of their horses. Quote, "We will sing likewise the exploits of our steeds. They are worthy of our praises. In what invasions, what fights have I not seen them helping us? But especially admirable were they when they bravely leapt upon the galleys, taking nothing with them but a coarse wine and cloves of garlic and onions. Despite this, they nevertheless seized the oars just like men, curved their backs over the thwarts and shouted, 'Hippopai,' which is a play on hippois, and the rupopai, the rhythmic chant of the lowly rowers." So, if an ancient Near Eastern war commemoration tends to be decidedly king-focused, how then do we get to the collective political war commemoration of the Bible and of the Aegean world? I would suggest two factors that must be considered, and I look forward to your responses to them. They are, number one, the different character of statehood in the Aegean and in the highlands of the southern Levant, and two, the appeal to a collective political entity, either Israel or Greece, that was not coterminous with a single state or political power. According to the Weberian notion of Gewalt monopole, the state is a political community with a demarcated geographical territory, a monopoly of legitimate force, of Gewalt. Yet, as Mogens Hansen has observed, even major European states of the 17th and 18th centuries would fail to meet the criterion of Gewaltmonopol. The same applies all the more so for the ancient world. In the southern Levant, throughout the late Bronze Age and much of the Iron Age, states continued to compete with private armies. And those private armies, or what Nadav Naaman calls Habiru-like bands, correspond to the sea pirates. So these, back up here, these private armies correspond to the sea pirates and the private warships of the East Aegean, who were always doing their own thing and it was very hard to get them under control. In contrast, the imperial armies that emerged in Mesopotamia and in Egypt are characterized by a strong, centralized states, which witnessed much more success in monopolizing force and curbing dissent. In other words, achieving a Gewaltmonopol. That the monopolistic system was not the norm in the Aegean world had a lot to do with geography. The hilly terrain and the countless islands impeded the efforts of any state to achieve a level of centralization comparable to that of the territorial states in the large flat basins of the Nile Delta in Mesopotamia. A modern analogy is the difference between France and Switzerland. The first is highly centralized, with Paris at the focus of all national life, while the latter is extraordinarily decentralized, with 26 cantons, each with its own constitution, legislature, government, and courts. And this has a lot to do with the geography of Switzerland. Although geography was much less a factor, the states of Israel and Judah never achieved the level of centralization witnessed in Mesopotamia and in Egypt. The highlands, this was not something that is by nature Israelite, it's just a pragmatic result of perhaps their condition, their situation, territorial situation. The highlands had always been home to recalcitrant elements, these Habiru-like groups, that lowland states and imperial governments struggled to bridle and integrate into their military forces. The same goes, as I argue in a forthcoming essay, for prophetic groups that stood on the periphery and often eluded the efforts of the kings to lure these groups to their courts where they could keep an eye on them. Think here of the biblical image of Elijah being fed by the ravens in contrast to the 400 false prophets who eat daily at the table of the king. The states that emerged in the Iron Age faced many hurdles in maintaining control of the periphery as they expanded from the hill country into the Jezreel Valley, the Galilee, the Transjordan, the Shpeilah, as well as Judah and the Negev. The number of putsches, dynasties, and shifting capitals reveals that the central highland states encountered great difficulties in achieving a Gewaltmonopol over other territories. This situation may have allowed for greater autonomy, diversity of political actors, dissent, and competition, which are expressed in the range of rivaling war memories and prophetic antagonism that characterizes biblical literature. But what was perhaps more decisive was the second factor, the appeal to a collective entity, Israel or Greece, that was not coterminous with a single state or political power. In the Aegean world, there were central institutions and cultic sites for a diversity of Greek political communities. But what began to catalyze a more robust sense of Greek identity was the Persian Wars. The assault by the Achaemenid armies forced Greek political communities to unite, even if recent scholarship is correct, in insisting that this unification was ad hoc, and in most instances failed to run very deeply. I think that what was most determinative in the emergence of a pan-Hellenic identity was the period subsequent to the Persian Wars, during the Peloponnesian Wars and thereafter, as Athens and its competitors vied for hegemony by claiming to have played the most significant role in the resistance against the Persian imperial encroachment. For biblical war commemoration, the situation is similar, but also different. Instead of appealing to a primordial sense of kinship that united communities that identify themselves with the people of Israel, I would follow others in arguing that we must locate the origins of the pan-Israelite identity in attempts by the kings of Israel to construct a common kinship base that could transcend the deep divisions separating the regions of their kingdom. We can observe similar political dynamics in Meshach's reign over Moab. The defeat of the kingdom, this is a more important point, the defeat of the kingdom of Israel in 722 paved the way for the kingdom of Judah, which had long stood under the direct political and cultural influence of Israel, to appropriate Israel's cultural and political legacy. The defeat of Israel unhinged the name of Israel from kingdom so that it became something that Judahites could appropriate and use for their own ends. In other words, In other words, Judah seized upon Israel's national discourse. And this is what I would argue goes a long way in explaining how biblical historians negotiate belonging and status among the people of Israel by commemorating which communities sacrificed or failed to do their part in the major wars that shaped the nation's history. Something very similar to what we see in the Aegean world. So I appreciate your attention, and I look forward to your responses to